Welcome, Jedi. Be you a path worker, a religionist, or a realist, or wherever you fit on the wide spectrum of what it means to be Jedi. Welcome today. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the hero's journey, partially, and being the hero of your own story. Now, before we go too far, for the longest period of time, the hero's journey was a de facto standard in teaching of the Jedi Path. And that's fallen to the wayside, and I'm uncertain my views on that. On the one hand, we see a lot of good books that come from a kind of personal, first-person point of view of the hero, especially in works like the Celestine Prophecy, which is not Jedi-related, but is a good side companion. I would say that it paints the Force in a very particular picture, and paints the way to the Force in a very particular picture, but the core of it is not bad. And then Jedi, which is phenomenal, and is often on the must-read list when people are asking older Jedi what they should be reading from the mythos to get on the path completely. Now, these things have something in common, and that is the hero's journey. Now, I'm going to be using the Campbell model a little bit, abridging it, modifying it heavily for our purposes, and I'm going to blaze through it really fast because that's not really the core of what this episode is about. But you need some of the foundation in case you haven't been given that foundation, and odds are you may not have been. It's something that's kind of been swept under the rug, partially out of fear that someone will act too heroic or do something too big and too bold that is right and good, or perhaps in too much of a zealousness to be right and good, they'll do the wrong thing. That's a common fear. But being a Jedi isn't about sitting there and dwelling in fear. So the hero's journey starts with the departure, moves to the initiation, and then the return. The departure starts most of the time with the call to adventure, the knowledge that there is a bigger something going on out there, and then there's a refusal to go into it. The hero is almost always reluctant. Now, I would say for a Jedi, we have the call to the Force first, and most of us ignore or push away against the call at first. Then you move into either a very strong connection, an event that causes a definitive link to the Force in such a way that you cannot ignore it, or you stumble across what I call the first mentor. The first mentor gets you started, helps you move into motion, or the first series of major events that connect you to the Force and to the path help you in that way. Now, after that, you have crossing the threshold. This is kind of the coming of age part, where you gain a certain level of knowledge and awareness, you gain a readiness, you go through a kind of a trial then and there, and then a dark time, a sense of loss. Something is taken. Oftentimes it is the mentor. Sometimes it is that greater connection to the Force initially. Most people who have an amazing initial connection to the Force find it very difficult to maintain that connection indefinitely, and their big experiences become small experiences. That's normal. If you started out and you were able to do amazing things, and now you can still do amazing things, but your day-to-day is very moderate, very leveled out, that's part of what's going on, and there's a sense of loss that goes with that. But a lot of times it's the loss of the first teacher, either outgrowing the first teacher, or they have to go their own separate ways, or as in our mythology, the mythos, the death of the first teacher. After that is the road of trials. This is in the initiation phase. This is where you've made that first connection, but to paraphrase from the mythos, you're not a Jedi yet. And that becoming a Jedi, truly making that connection completely, means crossing over the road of trials. And it means making a greater connection to the Force, a more steady, more stable connection, but also finding the greater teacher. Now, the greater teacher may, for many people, be the original teacher who then brings the greater lesson. But a lot of times it is moving on to either learn a greater lesson or find a greater teacher afterwards. And then comes the temptation to the dark side. that moment where we either are tempted to and fall, or tempted to and don't. After that, there's the atonement for past failures, and those that help them atone, and the ascension to the highest state of being. And finally, we have the return, the end of the battle and the reward, the end of the big quest. You've become a Jedi, you're there. And now you may not have the ability to go back to being who you were. Now, in the hero's journey, you go into the inability to return to the long road home, an adaptation phase, finally coming home, mastering both worlds, and then true freedom, the idea that you are now free to exist in both ways, as a common person and as an exceptional person. Now, I'm going to say this is where we run into the problem, because as this has been taught and used over the years, there's this idea that you are either the mentor or the one helping the adaptation phase, or one of the many people that is met on this journey who's went through it before, or you're in the journey, or you're doing it as a cycle. And the problem with a never-ending cycle on something like this is that there is no forward growth after that point, but also people become set in their ways and unwilling to advance or grow, to increase their capabilities, or to become more than they were. They've already made it. Why push further? And that is a problem with the hero's journey, and it's why I'm not pushing for that. It's a problem with the model and the archetypes that we see, not the individual stories, which often have a lot of good information and can help bring us back to basics, which is a necessity at all times for this to be a life path, instead of just an adventure in which we go around in a circle and then come back to start. The problem with this circular view is eventually you either become the mentor and you think you know everything, or you become one of the people on the road for someone else. And that's it. You stop being willing to act. This all stems from a conversation I had with someone, this episode that is, in which I'd said, I think most people are the main character of their story. And they said, well, that's the problem, is they think they're the main character and they're not. And I said, but they are. Everything you experience, everything you do in this world, every experience you have is from your point of view. You are the main character. You cannot be another character. You should always strive to understand the motivations, the goals, the hardships, the struggles, the strength, and the wisdom of all of the other characters in your story. But it's always going to be from your perspective. I hate to tell you, no amount of meditation, no amount of hard work is going to get you outside of that perspective completely. But if you're the main character, one thing you can do is aim to be the hero of your own story. Now, the hero is a very lofty goal. It's a very difficult role to take on. You have to be strong and dedicated, but heroes also fail and make mistakes and have to be redeemed, just as that hero's journey shows. This is where we can kind of abridge some of that in the initiation and departure phases and cycle the loop through there. Instead of really ever coming home, you recognize that to live as the hero, to be bettering the world, you must always be on the quest. If you're not always on the quest, you're not helping. You're not doing anything. At that point, you're just waiting. Maybe for someone to stumble by that you can help, but that's doing. And wouldn't it be so much better to be doing in an active way out there in some capacity? Be it as a teacher, be it as an advisor or a guide, be it as directly as a knight in action. I really miss the days when the word Jedi Knight meant Jedi questing, Jedi out in the world, but also was tied into the warrior aspect, with mystic and various other ideas being their own thing, where they were out in the world, they were out doing their own quest, but a knight was expected to be a guardian, a defender. I miss those days, because in an effort to placate people and make us all feel better about ourselves, we all ran around calling ourselves knights and then masters. I disdain both of those terms over time, because once you're a knight, well, then you don't got to do anything else. You're done. You're a knight. You've got it. Or better yet, you're a master and infallible. And instead, I prefer the archetypal knight, the archetypal spiritual warrior who's going out to make the world better and practices the martial way, the archetypal mystic who helps most often with advisement, the wizard, the vizard. Wizard comes from the term advisor. If you trace the etymology back, because it goes back to visor, which is advisor. So you trace that etymology back, and the wizard is someone who helps through advice more often than anything. Yeah, they focus on that connection to the Force more. That should be the goal of the mystic. But the warrior, the knight, the guardian, whatever term you use, should also be. And this is where knowing that you're the hero of your own story, focusing on being that hero, can be a balm to this. It can be something to aid you in this. It can soothe some of the wounds of defeat, and it can strengthen you to do this better, to be better at it, to make a bigger difference in it. When you are recognizing yourself as the hero of your own story, you get out of the problem of being a main character who's now a side character. And as I said, I was talking to a friend about this, and they said, the problem is people think they're the main character. I said, no, the problem is they don't realize they're the main character and they don't choose to be the hero. They become a side character in their own story that works and fulfills these obligations and does these things, but never is more, even if for a moment. Some of the best hero stories I have found personally are the stories in which the main character hits the bottom before they come back swinging, where they're knocked out of the fight or even has to take a back seat to other heroes. One of the great things about comic books is that they allow that trade back and forth. We're seeing that some in anime now. We're seeing that in manga. We're seeing that also in movies. We're seeing the big heavies, the Optimus Primes and the Luke Skywalkers even take a back seat. It's one of the things I actually like about the modern sequels is that for all that I may have my own issues here and there, at least we're not expecting our protagonist, who's already went through this hero's journey several dozen times and has hit the point where they're retired, has hit the point where they are just that teacher. We're not seeing them be the last hope. For anything else, good or bad, you can say at least we're seeing an evolution from that. In your own story, if you are a side character and you're just going through the motions, that's a problem. And as a Jedi, one of the first things you can do is to remind yourself that the word Jedi and hero are interconnected. You are the hero of your own story. You are the person who's going to save that other life. You are the person that's going to make the right decisions. And if you don't, you're the person who's going to have to atone. You're going to be the person that has to do better. Now, understand there is a vast difference between being the person that is the hero and, how can we say, becoming a zealot or looking for excuses to go above and beyond the pale. You have to understand that as a Jedi, you are a specific type of hero. You can't be the dark hero. You have to be an emissary of light, a light bringer. It's a very popular term that is used for a reason. You have to be the person who stands in the way of darkness. Your word has to be impeccable. You have to be someone that can be trusted time and time again to be a Jedi. And when you fail, you have to fully atone. You have to return from that failure. You have to ascend to the higher state. You may be the teacher. You may be all of these other things in the hero's journey. But the trick is, if you're also a hero in the hero's journey, a hero in your own story, even when you're the teacher, you don't just step back and let bad things happen. Now, someone's going to get up there and be like, well, Jedi don't need to be involved here, there, and somewhere else. And a lot of times, you're right. Look, if the police are dealing with something and you do not have the training, skill, or authority, and if you do, you already know how to approach them and address them in a way that you can be helpful by asking what you can do. If you're not that person, I don't care that you think you are. I don't care what you think at that point. What you think is not the debate here. You must be self-aware, looking inward for what you can do. I know what I can and can't do. I have helped paramedics before by keeping people out of the way for them to do their job. I've helped paramedics before by keeping a fence from falling on someone because it was the thing I could do, being the biggest, strongest guy there at the time. I'm going to tell you this. You got to know what your skills are, who you are. This is that introspection that you got to do. But the other side of that is you shouldn't be a bystander either. You shouldn't be sitting there going, well, there's nothing I can do when a terrible thing is happening. You have a cell phone on you. You can call the police. You can get assistance. You have 1,000 ways to engage in this world to make a difference. Sometimes that way is going to be like this. It's going to be the fist. Most of the time, it's going to be the brains. Our own mythology starts with the avoidance of conflict numerous times. We see the wise teacher avoiding conflict by using the force to trick others, to subdue others. He even says, when it is stated that we cannot win, there are alternatives to fighting. Later on, we see a statement of wanting to be a great warrior countered by the next mentor that war does not make one great. To be the hero in your own story is less glorious than you suspect, but it is more involved, and it means not being on autopilot more than anything. So if you're going to use the hero's journey, you're going to be on the Jedi path, you're going to be a path worker, you also have to be the hero in your own story. You have to reclaim the main character position. You can't write it off that you're just a side character, but you need to know your limits. And that's difficult. Hence why you need all of that meditation, all of that introspection, knowing who you are. And it's why you've got to better yourself, because I can do this today should not stop here. It should always be going up until it can't. There will be points at which you will hit your upper limit and cannot grow any further in one area, which is why you grow further in others, which is why you start to take on other areas that you can grow in. I think that sums up what I had to say on this. So as always, may the Force guide and protect you.